safety records. These are the outside satellite workers working into the headquarters, which is the farm. And so really, when we're talking about teleworking in the context of Australian farmers, and we're talking about the NBN, we're really talking about the last 7% that we always hear about. The ones that are going to be challenged in terms of working outside the fibre networks, and we're talking about the satellite and the fixed wireless alternatives. And if you consider this Generation C that was wonderfully described earlier this morning, and forgive me, that's why I ducked out of your talk. It wasn't because I was bored, it's because I had to change a slide. I thought it was a wonderful, wonderful description, so I acknowledge you as a source of inspiration. If we're talking about Gen C and we bring the farming community into that Generation C, it's not going to be a case of Muhammad coming to the mountain. We are going to have to get the mountain to Muhammad. And what does Muhammad look like? Well, the Australian farming community, when we talk about Australia's ageing workforce, we're talking about the ageing tip of the ageing workforce. The median age of Australian farmers is 53 compared to 39 for the rest of Australia. You know, almost 3/4 of our farmers are over 45-year-old. And if we decide that 2015 or even 2018 in terms of NBN rollout is going to be here, then by 2018, and this is including the replenishment of our farming workforce by those graduates, for example, from the various vet and tertiary sectors, then only just over 1/3 of our workforce is going to be over 65. More than half are going to be over 55-year-olds. So Gen C is going to include an older component of the workforce, which is alluded to in the earlier presentation. But this is a workforce that works 57 hours per week compared to 44 hours for the rest of the Australian workforce. More than half of our workforce works more than 50 hours per week. So, you know, if there is a notion out there that, look, take the time to learn the technology, otherwise you'll corner yourself out of the market. I'm not sure that this community has got the time to take out of their day-to-day work. So we need to consider how we tackle this community in fostering in the adoption and the value aims of these technologies. And in the introductory remarks, of course, you know, you've got 134,000 farm businesses out there. 99% of them are family owned and operated, and that is mum and dad owned and operated, given there is a very small proportion of Australian farms with their kids taking over the running of the farms. So you might have a 14-year-old on a farm who's interested in smart tech, and that may help you out, but you've probably only got them for 3 to 5 years before they leave. Now, 66% of our farming communities, our farming sector is connected to the internet. And that's predominantly for accessing weather, banking, and market information. Now, if you consider of that 66% connected to the internet, you know, 90%, more than 90% of the farmers within that very high income bracket are using the internet. But when you get down to the income bracket of 5 to 250,000 K, then you're looking at, you know, 1/3 of the farming community has access to the internet. And that is almost half of the sector in terms of the number of farms. And you should bear in mind that in this region, the Orana Far West region, you know, 1/4 of our farms are in that lower income bracket. So there's a significant proportion of farms in this region that don't have access to the internet. And the majority of Australian farmers, I can say this as a fact, are relying on dial-up and mobile, and they are generally dissatisfied with the quality of what they're getting. So, you know, consider technology and adoption of technology in agriculture, where I think the NBN is going to make a big difference. That's my proposition anyway. Is that we have to crack this dependency cycle. There is an emerging smart services sector in farming. It is around support services around husbanding technology on farms, and also manipulating and analysing and rendering the data that's been generated on farms. But they are struggling. It's self-sown, but they are struggling because of this dependency cycle. On one hand, you have these people out there developing and offering smart services who are struggling with how much do they invest, how much time do they spend, how much money do they invest in developing a product for use on farm. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have the farmers saying, well, look, how much is it really worth me to buy this product, and how much time have I got in my day to spend mastering the technology and getting the best out of it? And of course, that feeds in a never-ending cycle. because if farmers aren't willing to pay for a product at the right price point, the developers will only go half-hearted in developing something, because they're not going to develop something and not get their return on investment. And I think that high-speed internet, or I guess as a case in point, the national broadband network, is going to be a game changer, because it will allow us opportunities for the smart services sector to engage with the end users of the technology and these opportunities in a way that can be cost and time efficient for both sides of the argument. So when we pull the NBN out of the closet and dust it off, you know, that last 7% I'm talking about, we're really talking about terrestrial wireless for those that are within a certain range of an urban area. But predominantly it's going to be satellite-based NBN. Now we know there are issues around latency and effective weather, but I think that sort of, there are contingencies built into the design of the networks that will largely try and offset certainly the weather-related effects. The latency is something we have to live with. But is latency as big an issue as it's being made out to be? I would question that it is. So let's think about that last 7%. So how can a smart services sector work with high-speed internet and live video-like communications in the farm? Well, that means that farmers could potentially access some of these smart technologies and smart services without actually having to master the technology or service themselves. They can have a remote support network out there that can effectively manipulate and control the technology from afar, troubleshoot it from afar, render the generated data and information into some actionable format from afar. We have already the emergence of data support services that utilise the cloud. For example, there are 4 examples I have there: PA Source, PrecisionAgriculture.com, AgRequest, SST. These companies actually have established web interfaces so that farmers can simply pull out, say, a data card from a harvester, hook it into the USB, connect it online from the farmhouse, and the data will be uploaded, unpacked, cleaned, and laid over some other data sets that have been generated in the past, or some other freely available data, like, for example, an archive of satellite imagery. These companies work on the provision of that support service. One of them, at the top left one, PA Source, is a classic example of a company that they're not interested in even shop fronting. All they do is that they work behind the scenes. If you want to create a consultancy business working with farmers, you would contact these guys, you would pay them some sort of fee, and they will create your website for you, your badge, your shop front on it. They will work behind the scenes, and you are the one that are offering the service, the frontline service to the farmers, and they provide the tech smarts behind the scenes. And all of the farm data can be effectively managed from cloud-based warehouses. It can be anything from paddock production records, like I mentioned. You'll monitor data from your harvesters, livestock tracking data, but it can be things as simple as sowing dates, fertiliser application regimes, even, for example, associated with the location of your sheds. It could be a first aid kit manifest. It could be your registration requirement dates for your vehicles. It could be OH&S training records for your staff, your genetics, your finances. And all these can be effectively stored now on these live interactive warehouses. And of course, you consider the examples we've already heard earlier this morning and yesterday around the notion of smart TVs. Well, there are 2 elements of that. There is the effectively catch-up TV. So now consider your extension and education packages for farmers, your ChemCert training that has to be done every couple of years, your chainsaw level 1 certificates and so on. Everything that you need to do as a farmer pretty well can be mapped across a whole range of now mandatory certifications. These can be done online using effectively catch-up package type training packages and modules. I know they're being developed now, some are already being offered by now, even first aid training with access to metadata behind the scenes. This would avoid downtime associated with travelling to some area, some town, to do that training, if and when it's available. And of course, if you then go into live video link, then that means now that farmers could interact with their service provider rather than trying to make sense out of a yield map for a grain crop at home using whatever software they've had to upload, which they may or may not understand. Let the service provider do it. Have a live face-to-face chat with your service provider while screen sharing and data sharing and making sense of that data from an agronomic point or a livestock management point of view. And of course, if you go outside the farmhouse and there is now technology being developed around, high-speed Wi-Fi, directional Wi-Fi. So why not take that video conference capability from outside the farm office down into the yards where you have an animal that's down, and you could be having a chat to your vet, or as the case here at 2:15 in the morning when we should have been stripping Chardonnay grapes off the Hunter Valley, we were having a chat with the guru that could help us debug the problem with the cross conveyor in that harvester back at headquarters. And so why else would you need a video camera that plugs on your ear? Certainly if you're a copper, sure. But what about if you've got your head under the bonnet and you're talking to your machinery reseller 150 kilometres away, or you have an animal down in the yards with 3-day sickness and you're talking to your vet for a confirmatory diagnosis of that before you inject them with something that you've pulled out of the fridge. So the value of this sort of approach and the value of NBN should not be understated. It's low-hanging fruit, but it could make a big impact to the way we farm here and now. And I think that's where opportunity AMA comes in. A national communications network to all farms, high-speed internet to all farms, can make a significant difference. So that last 7% really should be the first 7% if we consider where our food and fibre comes from. And I think this is going to throw up some business model challenges. Consider, for example, it seems to be all about speed at the moment, but if you're considering, for example, a video conference capability in a farmhouse, someone to allow you to talk to your GP, or to someone that's giving you some support because you're feeling down, or the kids are talking to a local school teacher without having to travel in. It's about speed is good, but what about paying for the data you consume? What we run the risk of doing with an NBN is giving every Australian a free V8 supercar and then charging $2.50 at the Bowser to refuel it. And I think that's what we have to consider, is that have we got our dimensioning and our contention models working around the near future potential for farming families to utilise NBN as opposed to normal communications that we have now? I suspect there will be different models, and I hope, like heck, that we're not overemphasising the contention dimensioning models around current usage, because NBN opens up a whole range of new opportunities that are not very far away in terms of, oh yes, I can get that. That's not too hard to understand. Let's crack on with it. Now, what about another notion of multi-point connections within farms? I work on a station up in the Kimberley. I visit every month. We're doing some work up there. It is just a little larger than the ACT. Now, when we leave that farmhouse in the morning, just on dawn, we drive 48 kilometres to a critical water crossing. If that water crossing is underwater, we can't cross and do what we have to do, or check the bore on the far eastern side. We have to turn around and come all the way back. Now, what about vision systems, sentinel vision systems, or monitoring technology for bores? You consider that if a solar tracker on a bore, which is the sole source of power for that pump, simply doesn't follow the sun, then the bore pump stops, the water runs out, and maybe